press on. We've got 5 stages of grief to go through. Not a lot of time to do it. So let's talk some Chiefs. Welcome to the Chief of the North and RGR Football. I'm Seth Kaiser, the Chief of the North, Minnesota Chiefs fan, Ed, whatever you want to call me. Maybe not Ed, that'd be weird. As we try to do every week, and I failed to do last week, try to come to you guys, Chiefs Kingdom, and give you a little bit of insight, or hopefully insight, as to what's interesting to me from that week's game and things that I'm writing about and things that I'll be looking at in the future. I also try to answer some mailbag questions. I still have some mailbag questions from 2 weeks ago. I'm sorry that I missed last week. The day job was not a forgiving one. As some of you probably know, I was at Arrowhead this weekend watching the Chiefs play the Bills. Got to be there for what was unfortunately a loss, but was a much more competitive game than it looked like it would be at the beginning. Not that that makes people feel better necessarily, but I actually walked out of there feeling fine. And that's what I wrote about. And so we're going to talk about that shortly in terms of reasonable expectations for the Chiefs this year and kind of accepting that they are who they are and how that's actually given me a fair amount of peace about the whole thing. So first, though, I'm going to go back and take a look at some of the mailbag questions from a couple weeks ago that are still relevant today. As always, if you put some question marks in front of the comments below, ask a mailbag question. I'll be happy to take a look at that, give those first priority. One of my very favorite things is to answer mailbag questions. So thank you guys for participating in that. And then we're going to talk about what I wrote about this week, the 5 stages of dealing with the Chiefs 2023 season, a shameless gimmick, but one that actually works pretty well. So first, let's look at some of the mailbag questions that were asked several weeks ago. Journey of Purpose asked, who are the teams left on the schedule that Skyy Moore can have a couple breakout games as Rashid did versus Las Vegas, and why? When they both have 2 to 3 under their belt, we can all breathe easily. You're going into the playoffs and into the season. You know, I really appreciate your optimism. I think if a Skyy Moore breakout game was going to occur, it would have happened by now. And that's one thing to keep in mind. And I'm going to pull up the Chiefs snap counts 2023. A lot of what you're looking for when you are early in a player's career are traits-based, similar to what you are looking for when you're reviewing college players. It's not going to necessarily be about the production. It can be, but not necessarily. What you're often looking for are traits that are there, and more importantly, traits that are not. Traits that allow them to succeed or traits that prevent them from succeeding. And Skyy Moore's flaws have been talked about almost ad nauseum to an extent. It's worth noting that against Buffalo, he was only on the field for about 35% of the snaps. Now, the week before, he was on the field for 65% of the snaps. But we've seen, they start off the season, look like they're planning on having him out there at least 60% of the time consistently. Now we've seen more dips with various formations as we've received Rashid Rice's numbers come up. Some of that, Rice's snaps have come from other places, but some of them come from Skyy Moore as well, especially taking some of those slot snaps. And so what I would say is, regardless of the opponent, Skyy Moore needs to demonstrate that he can have that breakout game and that the deficiencies that he's shown in terms of consistency in creating separation, side adjustments, alignment, that kind of thing, some of the same things we are all bemoaning regarding Kadarius Toney, and rightfully so. He needs to show he can do those, or the difference between him and Toney, for as much as Kadarius Toney's driving people crazy this week, and again, rightfully so. I've had a lot of people say, well, why don't they just cut him? I'm curious what would happen if the cupboard weren't so bare at wide receiver. But the reality is, Kadarius Toney has shown more ability to make things happen than Skyy Moore has with the ball in his hands. And when the cupboard is completely bare at the receiver room, you kind of lose the ability to have that flexibility in 1 year. With Moore, I don't think it'll happen. He just doesn't quite seem to have, for a smaller receiver, you need to be unusually strong through contact. He doesn't seem to have that. In college, it looked like he was able to get by with it because he was kind of a smooth route runner. He was able to get through contact. But it seems like the stronger players that you're facing at the NFL level, that seems to bother him more while he's on his routes. And I haven't seen that necessarily improve. He also just doesn't have the type of athleticism that you're necessarily looking for a guy that doesn't have, the strength to necessarily push his way to get to his spots. And that's an oversimplification. And maybe it's coming from Moore, but he just hasn't demonstrated. Like, so with Rashee Rice, you can see his strength and you can see his explosiveness, right? Even though he doesn't have great long speed. And obviously, he put a ball on the ground against the Bills. That's part of what happens when you're a yards after catch guy. That's going to happen a little more often to you. But you can see those traits come through at the pro level. With Skyy Moore, we haven't seen that happen yet. And so the question would be, what would his breakout game look like? If it was like what he did in college, it would be him utilizing smooth route running and really great releases to generate quick separation. And if we were going to see that consistently from him, I feel like we would have by now. No one was, I don't think, beating the Skyy Moore drum harder than me. Maybe a few were. But at a certain point, when you're getting near the end of year 2 in someone's career, it's kind of tough to say that there's going to be a jump coming at that point, unless he suddenly starts being able to handle contact significantly better. And we'll see if that happens. That would be incredible, but it's tough to count on that at this point after well over a season and a half. Squirrel Nest Media asks, how did Wanya Morris do? Should we be pounding the table for Joe Alt? So Wanya Morris only played a couple snaps against the Raiders, but he did actually play a significant number of snaps against the Packers, a game that didn't have a lot of great things come out of it, but it did have at least one really good thing come out of it, and that's Wanya Morris showing the ability to see that wall that he creates there, right? He displaces the tackle and continues to help build that wall to where no one else see this other tackle tries to come through. Morris doesn't allow it. He also, and this was the tunnel that got created there, was a big run for Pacheco. He showed the ability to bury guys and play mean as I love that the defender got mad and pulled his arm down there as a run blocker. And he showed he showed the ability to displace defensive ends. He showed the ability to set the edge, the opposite direction of setting the edge, as it were. He showed the ability to wall off there, but also to displace guys and get a little push on there. And Rashawn Gary's a strong guy to be able to see that hand placement right there. And this is one of the things that's interesting about him. He played in college multiple seasons. You see how he displaces that left arm? That's the kind of thing that you're looking for in a young guy, the intelligence to be able to continue that hand fighting and then drive the guy off the ball. In terms of as a pass protector against the Packers, he had a good game overall. He does give up a little bit here, but this is a good rep against a really, really good pass rusher in Rashawn Gary. And there were multiple times where he showed the ability to protect Mahomes. And I haven't charted his snaps against the Bills. I know he did have one really tough snap against Von Miller, maybe a couple. But overall, he played most of the game without me noticing him. And that's just as good a job, if not better, than what Donovan Smith was doing in a small sample size, mind you, prior to going down with injury. And so if you want to take a silver lining from the Bills game and Packers game, obviously a couple of really tough losses in a wide open AFC. It cost them the 1 seed. It's a bummer. But Wanya Morris might be good enough to hold it down at left tackle, which would be tremendous news for the Chiefs when you're talking about roster building moving forward. There's still the big question marks with Jawan Taylor, who continues to hit some of those penalties and not play as well in pass protection. Still generally good in pass protection, but man, it's continually harder to balance that out with the penalties, because even if you're generally good in pass protection, if you're getting a penalty a game or more, that does not balance out because it's such a hindrance and it sets the team back. And as we've talked about here previously, this is not a team that can live the way it used to in terms of being able to set themselves back. So other than Wanya Morris, what I wrote about this week, I'm going to get to these other two mailbag questions. Brian Butler asked, do you like any of the wide receivers in the upcoming draft to fit the needs of the Chiefs, a fast, deep threat? You guys, if you don't know this, I don't watch college football. I tend to kind of ignore it until it's time to really prep for things in the draft. I'm guessing for the third year in a row, I'm going to be looking at wide receivers. One thing worth noting, Matt Miller reported that Brett Veach did try, he's used the word desperately, I want to say, to trade up in the draft this year. I would bet my last buck that they were looking to get Zay Flowers. I really think they were, but they just weren't able to. Teams aren't willing to trade up with them as much as maybe they'd like. Maybe they saw what happened with Trent McDuffie. They thought, no, never again. So they saw the problem that was there. And I'm happy that they got Rashee Rice, who looks like a legitimately good receiver, a guy who can be maybe a high-end number 2 wide receiver when he peaks out. I think as of right now, he's already a competent number 2 wide receiver. It's just a matter of him improving in terms of some of those rookie things that you're still going to see from him, which is why his involvement is a little more limited, even though you're seeing certain things like a few more back shoulder throws. His touchdown against the Bills, the way he wrapped that route around at the back of the end zone, that's what you want to see out of your young guys. And him doing that more and more, you're going to see him incorporated more and more into the offense. I do think what they're looking for, what they should be looking for, in my opinion, in this draft is a true, legitimate deep threat, but not just a deep threat. You want a guy who can threaten at multiple levels. You want like a true X receiver, a ball winner type guy. Rashee Rice can be a ball winner, but he doesn't have really good deep speed. But now you've got a guy that you can do the shallow stuff, the intermediate stuff with Rashee Rice, and a guy that you can trust. Now you need that guy that can win deep, threaten defenses over the top the way MVS is supposed to and hasn't this season, the way Justin Watson can in small sample sizes, but not consistently enough. And so that's really what they're going to be looking for is a legit deep threat, which involves ball skills as well, ball tracking skills, the ability to read the defense on the fly and see how to adjust to what the safety's doing so you're in the right spot when the ball comes down. Think Tyler Lockett on one end and what we've seen from MVS this year on the other end. So my guess is that's a first round consideration for them, no matter, especially if Wanya Morris keeps doing what he's doing and you don't need to draft a left tackle. That would be a massive win for Brett Veach because that would allow them to say, okay, maybe we don't need that left tackle. We've got a guy who's good enough in our system, and then we can go get a wide receiver. They might need to trade up again, but it's a really good wide receiver class. Better, I would say, than last year's, especially at the top end. The very top end is much, 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 much better. But they're not going to have a shot at some of those guys. It's a question of who falls to the late teens or something like that, depending on where the Chiefs are picking. Depending on how the next 4 weeks go, if they go poorly, the Chiefs might be picking higher than we're accustomed to. So it's about the skill set. They need a guy. One problem they've had this year is that everyone is a little bit too niche. Everyone can only do certain things. I think they need a guy who can threaten at least at two levels of the defense, in addition to being a deep ball threat, and be a guy who's a little more of a contested ball guy. That's really hurt them this year, not having as many guys they trust in those situations. They've got Kelsey, and they've got, now you see a little more with Rice. Watson's done a few, but that's not something he can do consistently. And so Sherry Street says, if Veach don't fix the receivers in the offseason, it's time to question Veach. He didn't pay Hill to pay Brown, didn't pay Brown to pay Jones, won't pay Jones, and he's a free agent. Should we be worried Veach is turning into Pioli? Thanks for the great content. Hey, thanks for the kind words. No, he's drafting significantly better than Pioli did. Significantly better. When we just watched Shamari Connor, another late round guy, looking like a legitimate part of this defense, to where maybe in a couple of years it's going to be, Brian Cook and Shamari Connor being the top two safeties. I mean, and they're finding these guys in late rounds. They also are showing, FAU's kind of had a redshirt year, but for all the talk about wide receiver, Rashee Rice, if there weren't all these other issues with the receiver room, let's say MVS played exactly the same level he played last year, and Rashee Rice was doing exactly the same thing he's doing now, I think, for one thing, the Chiefs would probably be, rather than 8-5, they'd probably be more like 10-3, because MVS has struggled that much, especially late in games. We've been over that ad nauseum, right? And people would say, oh, okay, he finally got one. He finally got the guy that he really needed to get. But because MVS took a step back, in addition to Tony not developing and Moore not developing, that's just a lot of misses there. And so I think I get why people are questioning Veach's ability to grab receivers. But seeing Rashee Rice's skill set and how well it complements the offense makes me breathe a little bit easier. And knowing he was trying to trade up in the draft to address it even more aggressively, that does make me feel better. I would note, not paying Hill. He did not pay Hill to pay Brown. I can tell you that. Absolute fact. They didn't pay Hill for the entire roster building purposes. They needed to revamp the defense. They needed the defense to get significantly younger. And so if you don't trade Hill, you lack for sure the ability to pay Jones. And we'll see what happens with Jones. They had Jones more in mind when Hill walked than Brown. And you've kind of seen what's happened with Orlando Brown. But it was more so you can't pay Jones as well. And so that's kind of gone the route that it's gone. But also, it wasn't just a salary cap move. You got to remember, a large part of why the defense is so good this year is because of the Hill trade and what they've been able to do in terms of getting young talent that's going to allow them to play around a little more with the salary cap next year. Even with the guys they have leaving in free agency, starting next year and the year after, they've got significantly more wiggle room, even as Mahomes' cap hit gets kind of crazy. So that's worth noting. So I would say in terms of team building stuff, the trade of Tyreek Hill really does make sense, and they were able to get it done and win the Super Bowl without him. The mistake they made was in how the wide receiver room got addressed thereafter. So I wouldn't look at the Hill move or the Brown move. Both of those look like wins, in my opinion, with the way Brown is playing in Cincinnati. I don't know if he's a $16 million a year tackle. A lot closer. With the way things have gone with Wanya Morris or with Jawan Taylor, would it have been better to pay Brown $16 million than you have Wanya Morris on the right side and Brown on the left? Maybe, yeah. And that might have changed things, but he was never going to sign in Kansas City for $16 million. There's a reason why his representation had to call up the Bengals to get that job. I mean, things had gone a certain direction. He could have just gone to the Chiefs, said, okay, fine, I'll take 16 after he tested the market. But that relationship was kind of fractured at that point. So, and that's the human element. You got to remember that. And in terms of not paying Jones, I think they've got a set amount. I don't think they're going to deviate from it. We'll see what happens this next offseason. That's going to be a bummer if they can't keep him around. He's a future Hall of Famer. They build the entire pass rush around him. But I do appreciate the fact that they seem to have set a limit, and they're probably not going to go beyond that limit. So none of those things, each and every one of them, when you look at them individually, they're all fine. They're all even good decisions. The biggest thing is their failure this season to address the wide receiver position the way that they should have. If you're desperate enough to try to trade up in the draft and you're not able to make it happen, then you got to figure out what you're going to do to compensate for that. You know, they could have signed Jacoby Meyer for $11 million a year. And he's a solid receiver. He's as good or actually a little bit better than Juju was last year. And that could have addressed a lot of these other issues. Not trading for a guy mid-season, that I'm going to argue until the cows come home that they could have made some offers on some guys on teams that are going nowhere that could have them in prime position to keep the offense afloat. That's the biggest miss of the Veach era that I've seen, other than that very first draft, which is horrendous. But the failure to, as they saw that Moore and Tony weren't going to work out, at least the way they'd wanted them to not address that was problematic. So that kind of brings me to the article that I wrote this week. And of course, mailbag questions, as ever, take far too long to draft. The 5 stages of 2023 Chiefs fandom. I'm going to pull up something that makes you feel not terrible about life. That's Chris Jones being a monster, George Karlaftis stepping in. Here's another thing to take a look at that I thought was interesting that Chiefs fans should look at. The Chiefs point differential, which is generally a pretty good gauge of where a team's at overall, is still pretty good. And they still have, this was me after MVS dropped that late touchdown against the Bills. I included that in there just because it's a lot of fun. This is actually unlocked for you to read at the Chief of North newsletter. It's worth noting the Chiefs are still 7th in EPA, expected points added per drop back. These are all just little things to note, and then this is just like a fun play to watch as we try to think about the future of the Chiefs. Here's the entire point of the article. You can check it out on the Chief of the North newsletter. You can just go to mnchiefsfan.substack.com. This is unlocked for anyone to read. There's a way to subscribe there for cheaper. Consider subscribing. You've got the $12 a year forever, etc. I actually wasn't upset when the very first line in the articles, I wasn't mad on Sunday night as I left Arrowhead Stadium. No, seriously, I wasn't. And I wasn't. The reality of the situation is I've been able to kind of accept, okay, this is who the Chiefs are. I've stopped waiting for the switch to flip and for the mistakes to stop. I've also stopped waiting for the offense to find that explosive 6th gear that it used to have that allowed them to overcome those mistakes, which have been a part of their DNA for years. They really have. But they've always been able to overcome it. And so for me, of course I went through, the 5 stages of grief, denial, anger, then you've got a little bit of bargaining that happens, then depression and acceptance. I have hit acceptance. That was one reason I was able to leave Arrowhead. I have accepted this is who the Chiefs are. They're a decent team, a pretty good team even, but not a great team. And what that means, any given Sunday, they can easily lose. Any given Sunday, they can easily win. The expectation is no longer what it was, particularly on the offensive side of the ball. I'm done bargaining. Well, but we'll start with the denial. I am done failing to accept that this is who they are. I'm done failing to accept that this is what the wide receiver room is and that it's had a genuine ripple effect on the entire team, including Mahomes, who himself isn't playing quite as well as he normally does. I think in part because of some of those concerns that exist in terms of what's going to happen consistently snap by snap. I think that's taken a toll on him, and that's why you see a little more frequently him making mistakes that you wouldn't usually see from him because he doesn't know what's going to happen when he lines up. Part two for me was anger. And I wrote a bunch of things about this. How dare Brett Veach give Mahomes this wide receiver room? How do you not see this coming? How could they give Taylor $20 million per year, but not bring in a solid veteran receiver for half that number? How could they not see coming that maybe Tony and Moore wouldn't take a step forward and the MVS might take a step back? All of these things make me mad. But here's the thing. Me being mad about it doesn't do anything. It doesn't accomplish anything. It's not why I watch the game or why I analyze it. But here's what I've managed to do. All of those things are accurate. Veach, I think, has misstepped this year in terms of roster building with the wide receiver room. That's a fact. It's disappointing, but rather than getting angry about it, I'm going to allow myself to get a little bit sad about it. Go right through the bargaining portion and understand that there's nothing to be done. They can alter the offense a little bit. And we've talked about that. They can switch to a little more under center. Rashee Rice can be more of a primary receiver. The allocation of the wide receiver room can be shifted. They can do more play action, bootleg type stuff, a little more gap-based stuff, a little more power running. They can do all that. It's not going to completely fix the issues. And now that I've accepted that, once I got past the anger, what really you want to do is once you've accepted that as true, you can't bargain your way out of it. You can't buy your way out of it. You can't do anything about it. You want to go back to step two and be angry again. Or instead, like me, you can go to step four and become depressed and become sad that this is the state of it, that this year we're watching a good, not great team. However, the way to avoid that, accept what the Chiefs are and also what they are not. They are not a trash team. They're not a bad team. They are basically the equivalent because they've got a good defense and a pretty mediocre offense in terms of consistency. It's maybe a little above average because they're moving the ball decently, but you've seen it. The errors, the red zone struggles, those things combine to make you a mediocre offense because you can't finish, can't put points on the board no matter how well you're moving the ball. So basically what we've got is the Chiefs seasons 2013 through 2016 in terms of the offense being pretty meh, the defense being good. The one difference is the quarterback. But like I wrote here, that difference, it matters a lot. A lot, especially in a one-off playoff situation. And what I wrote here, and I believe this is true, with a good defense, all it takes is a few games of Mahomes catching fire for the Chiefs to go on a run. It should be outlandish. Is it a guarantee? Nope. Are they guaranteed to even win in the wild card round if they play there? Nope. But my expectation for them is to make the playoffs, maybe win a game or two, probably not make a run, but they can. And by accepting those two things, keeps me from being depressed because, you know what? Got some good football left to watch, hopefully. And by lowering those expectations a little bit and by just accepting who the Chiefs are, I'm a happier, healthier guy. So I hope some of that is helpful for you guys as well. And then we can just accept that after 5 years of the rules not applying to Chiefs fanhood, that the expectation was a Super Bowl, or at least an AFC Championship appearance or victory. We can accept that this year, this team is just not as good. It's not good enough on offense for that to be the expectation. It's hard to accept, but once you do, it's a lot easier to walk out of a tough game with a smile on your face. All right. That's what I got for you guys this week. Went a little long, of course. I think I said that every time. Please be sure to hit like, subscribe, do all the YouTube things. Ryan and the gang here do a great job. And you know what? As strange as it is when we're going through the 5 stages of dealing with their season, it is still an exceptional time to be a Chiefs fan.